enjoy the ride with Crystal Petrie Consulting. So inspiring, pushing you to your...
Hello, and welcome to another episode of 60 Minutes With. I'm your host, Crystal Petrie. Today, we're going to talk about broken hearts to blooming, how to get past grief. And today on this podcast, we have Cathy Taylor. She is going to educate us on how to get through grief, how to get through traumatic things. She is a life coach that specializes in grief counseling. So welcome to the podcast, Cathy.
Thank you, Crystal.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Thank you so much for agreeing to sit down and discuss with me. I feel like such a difficult subject and maybe something that everybody's going to have to go through eventually.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you love, you're going to go through grief.
That's great.
Yes.
That's great. So give me your definition of grief. What is it?
Okay. So the definition that everyone knows grief is it's a natural process of loss. What I say grief is just love, like we just spoke about. I mean, if you love someone and they passed, you're going to have a broken heart. You're going to have to go through a grief process. Through that grief process, it's lots of emotions. But ultimately, I would say my definition is grief is love.
What is the difference, or is there a difference between grief and sadness?
Okay, so sadness is one of those emotions tied into grief. Like I said, if I do have a visual ball that has all the emotions with grief. Grief is the word of a process that you go through. Sadness is a word that's entangled with grief in that process, if that makes sense.
It does. So grief, by definition, it's meant to go through it. It's something
Absolutely.
that you're meant to go through.
It's grief is the word of your heart going through a process. Sadness is an emotion of your heart in that process.
Why do people experience grief in different ways?
Well, I mean, we all have different thumbprints. There's not one of us that has a thumbprint the same. So it's the same thing with grief. Mm-hmm. We're going to all go through it differently. And there is no right or wrong way. When I'm working with clients or if I'm doing a retreat for a grief retreat, that's what I tell them. You know, we cannot compare our situations or even our losses. Say that, I lost my mother at a very young age. I really can't compare my loss with someone else's that lost their mother maybe later in life, because we were at two different seasons of our life too. Relationship has a lot to do with it. You know, what type of relationship you had with that person that has passed on. Unfortunately, some relationships aren't that good. So there's a lot of factors in how each person grieves.
Whenever people grieve, what I've noticed is that it feels like the person that's going through the grief, your life completely stops. Mm-hmm. Everyone else's life just keeps going like nothing happened. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Why is that sudden stop in your life, but everyone else's life just keeps going?
Right. Well, and you just answered the question right now. There is, yes, your life has stopped. And through the process of losing someone, the first week through the funeral, everyone's there for you. And it's so wonderful to have a great support group. It makes that process a lot easier too. But a great example of two different styles of grief is, say, a husband and wife. They both lost a child. Men typically grieve a lot different than women. Through an example that I know, the husband continued on like nothing ever happened. But the wife was devastated. She didn't want to go in public, didn't want to do anything at the beginning, of course, but the husband wanted to continue on. Now, there's no right or wrong there, because that was his way to deal with grief, and that was her way to deal with grief.
I think you brought up a really important subject there. Why is it that men and women grieve differently?
Well, I don't think I have that magic answer. Same thing as men do things differently than women. From a woman's perspective, I mean, God did create us both differently. Like I said, men tend to have that protective mode in them, to be the strong one in the family, to be the leader, to be there for the others, to guide them through it. I think it's just that the male is more of the protector of the family, the home, and they want to be strong for children or wives or their mothers if they lost their spouses.
Is grief necessary? I mean, I know you said if you love and then you lose that love, you will grieve. But is it necessary? Is it something that we could just skip altogether?
No. Most people do. Most want to just put it under the rug and say, I'm going to go on with my life, because there's nothing that we can do. But grief is definitely something you have to process. If you don't take care of it, it's going to be with you the rest of your life. Grief is no different than any other obstacle in your life that you have to do work on. I can say, for an example, someone in addiction, they have to do work to get better, to have that stronghold of addiction taken away where they can handle it. It's the same with grief. Grief is a part of recovery. And most people do not recognize that you have to recover. But you have to do work in grief as well.
I never thought about it like that. Wow, that was an aha moment for me. You do have to recover from it.
Yeah. But typically, if you're staying busy, you're not doing anything but prolonging your process. And so, a lot of people say time heals.
That's not
Well, that's
true.
false. It'd be no different than breaking your leg, and you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you, well, time's going to heal your broken leg.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. So time is just one of those false myths with grief.
Some people, when they grieve, they go to other methods of trying to maybe hide it or not acknowledge it. They go to alcohol or drugs or overeating and binging and things like that. What do you think about that as far as trying to handle grief?
Right. It's just a temporary method, or whatever you want to call it, that's going to numb your pain. They're just really trying to numb what is there, and that's pain. But pain is a part of grieving. Without the pain, if we block the pain, we block that capacity to even feel joy again in the future, because you're just numbing it. And if you're numbing it with that's typically can go into a whole nother realm that you have to get over. If someone begins to drink, that can easily turn into an addiction, because you're just ultimately trying to numb that pain. Same thing with shopping. I mean, you can go shopping and then you can be in debt. So you're just really creating other avenues that you're going to have to deal with as well on top of your grief.
Would you say the same thing for people who deal with grief in anger?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, anger is one of the strongest emotions in grief. And of course, that's going to be rooted through unforgiveness. Typically, if it's some type of accident, or if it's someone else's fault for your loved one's loss, there's going to be a lot of anger you've got to deal with. A lot of times, and unfortunately there are so many suicides today with our youth. And what I've, from a lot of clients that have had to go through that particular journey, they have a lot of anger within themselves and a lot of guilt. And that guilt can just bury you. And so it just makes you angry. Sometimes, of course, with the one that committed suicide, you're angry that that happened. Then you're angry with yourself, thinking that you could have done something.
Right. Why didn't I see it?
Yes, because guilt can easily smother you. One thing that I do tell them is, did you set out to harm them? Well, the answer is always no. You're not harming that person. It was their choice to commit suicide. So it's that guilt that you're trying to alleviate from that person. And a lot of times when guilt is lifted up, anger is going to cease too.
What do you think is the hardest part about grief?
Well, I think just navigating through the journey. I mean, it is a tough road, and there is no compass for it. Yes, there's many avenues that you can take. There's lots and lots of support groups, books, manuals, everything on grief. But unfortunately, you have to navigate through your own grief, because like I said at the beginning, we all have one fingerprint. So it is your grief that you're walking on. It is a road that is individualized for you.
Of all the emotions, is grief the hardest to understand and get through?
I think so. There's so many emotions, and the thing is with grief is all those emotions are in grief. I tell you one thing that many people don't really recognize in grief are the expectations.
What do you mean?
Well, as far as the griever has expectations on their own circle around them, on how they're going to acknowledge your grief. Then the griever has expectations too within their self. So a lot of times when we set those expectations up, say like time, say that you and a friend both lost your mothers, and your friend seems to be doing okay. She really got through it okay, and I mean, she's just having life over there, and I'm still over here. I can't even really get back to my normalcy, because that's expectations. You set those expectations up that you want to be where your friend is a year down the road. Well, it might take you or whoever else 2 or 3 years. It might take shorter. So it's those expectations that we set ourselves up.
I know that you experienced a tragic loss. I'd like to ask about that, because I know that kind of pivoted your life to becoming a grief counselor. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, throughout my lifetime, I've experienced tremendous loss. I lost my mother and father in my 30s, my lifelong dearest best friend when I was 39, and grandparents all gone, aunts and uncles. But the most traumatic came October 10th of 2017, when it was my 23-year-old son. It was a devastating blow, and an experience that I never had to go through prior. With the grief with my mother and father and best friend, those were different. Losing a child is just, it's kind of ripped my heart out.
Now, were you a grief counselor before the loss of your son and then after kind of really leaned into it? Or did it all just come after the loss of your
Right,
son?
yeah, grief found me.
Mhm.
That's what I say now. Going through, I was a life coach prior to the loss of my son. Didn't work with anyone on grief, real personal issues mainly, addictions, things like that. So yeah, going through my own process of grief, I just learned so much. So like I said, grief kind of found me, and it's kind of where I'm at today.
I know you're a Christian,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that you believe in God, you believe in Jesus Christ and his teachings. You're a
Mhm,
follower of
mhm.
his teachings. What has God told you or revealed to you about the loss of your son?
Well, going through the process at the very beginning, I stayed in that busyness mode. I continued on doing ministry work, but about midway through my journey, I hit that wall because I was back to where I was at the beginning because I didn't deal with my grief. And so through that process of getting still and not waiting on time to heal me, because that wasn't working either.
It does not.
Busyness wasn't helping. I was doing all the right things. I facilitated a grief share group, went to a grief conference in Colorado. So I was doing all the right things, but yet I was still at a wall. So when I got to that wall, I just basically cried out to the Lord. I don't know what to do. It's not well with my soul. I feel like it is what it is. And he brought me back to his word because I had to stand on those promises and I had to believe them.
Yeah.
I was just reading the scriptures, yet I didn't necessarily believe that he could heal my broken heart. But so he brought me back to the beginning.
And who has God become for you since the loss of your son?
Man, that's a good question. I mean, I had a wonderful relationship prior, but I guess I have that true relationship with him now that I can really trust him for all things. Getting through the darkest period in my life, I can look back now and see his hand from the very beginning when my husband and I received that knock at the door from the sheriff's department. I can see his hand through it all now. So I can stand on those promises. I can speak about those promises to ones that are hurting today, and I can guarantee to them that they are true. You have to receive it. You have to keep going and keep moving.
Did you get mad at God for taking your son?
You know, I didn't. I didn't, but a lot of people do.
Yes.
It's really the first thing that is a go-to is the anger with God. How can you allow this to happen, especially with children? Recently, a year and a half ago, some very dear people in our lives had a baby, and 5 days later, the baby passed away from something very rare. So, yeah, times like that, it's okay to question God. Job questioned God.
Yes.
So Job is a great story for grief, and I didn't really understand. I knew Job's story prior, but I actually did a very deep study in Job going through my grief because he had all those questions, and God was right there. He was very silent till the very end.
Yes.
Then he answered his questions.
He did. He did. What do you say to people who say, well, you're a Christian. You don't need to go to therapy. You don't need counseling. Just go to
Mhm.
God. Just talk to Jesus. That's all you need is just Jesus.
Well, I think it's very courageous to seek help. It is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of courage. And in His Word, He does say seek counsel. And so, if you're in a deep spot through your grief that you cannot seem to get past, absolutely, I believe that a therapist needs to be a part of your journey. A therapist was a part of mine. I don't hide anything. I'm very transparent with everything through my own journey. So yes, some people don't even leave their home, for years. So yeah, you need to see a therapist. And sometimes, if it's that the grief is so deep, sometimes it can turn into a mental that you have to see a psychiatrist. So absolutely, I feel that God has put professionals here for all of us to use, and so it's just a tool. So why wouldn't you use a good tool that's here?
Absolutely. Do you feel like, and this is maybe a difficult question, do you feel like that you are a stronger person, a better person since the loss of your son?
Oh, absolutely. I am at a place today that I never was before. And like I said, going through the grief process, it taught me so much about myself. It taught me so much about my relationship with the Lord. He clearly showed me the strength that I did have with Him by my side, although there was so many days that I couldn't even feel any kind of presence at all. I found peace in my life that I never had prior, mainly because when you have something traumatic happening in your life, and that's grief, it doesn't matter what type of grief, whatever grief it is for you, you just see the world differently. So things in your life that was important to you back then that are not really important to you now, you get rid of a lot of things in your life. You live life one day at a time. And as far as me, I make as many memories as I possibly can and do good with every day that I have.
Do you think losing a child is the worst grief that someone could go through, that someone can endure?
Well, everyone's loss is their loss. So I don't compare losses. Losing a child is traumatic. There's a lot of trauma involved when you lose someone instantly versus, long-term illness or something like that. The loss is still the same. The grief is still the same. That person's loss is no different from my loss of losing a child because it's their loss. It's their relationship. But I will say, as far as losing a child, because it's no parent, even, when you have your children and you're raising them and they're becoming adults and you look forward to their weddings and their children and them becoming the parents. So you just don't expect that to happen. So there's a lot of trauma involved with that as well as grief.
Is grief something you ever get through, or do you feel like you just grieve in a different way?
Well, I believe that grief is a season. Many speak about grief the rest of your life. It's a loss. And I have a little analogy here that I'll do. Some people are going to say this is grief or the loss. I say it's the loss. But grief is a process that you get through. So when you first going through it, so grief is right here and it's in the smaller So you're just there's not a whole lot of space around here. So you're consumed with all those emotions. And you put the lid on it and you just feel suffocated. You're suffocating because there's just not any space around here. It's all grief.
Yes.
But as your grief goes on and you begin to say, you begin to continue on with the positive things in your life. You make a choice that I'm going to move forward, even though I still have all these feelings. I'm still going to move forward. Then the loss, the grief goes into this one. You have a little bit more space here. So you can begin to breathe again. You can begin to do the things in your life that brought you some enjoyment. You can laugh for the first time. A lot of people, it takes forever to do something fun or to even laugh again because you feel a little bit guilty because your loved one's not here. So I remember the first time that I laughed, I never thought I'd laugh again, but it was, God knows. And so it's those kind of things where you start to grow. Then you have a bigger jar here, and you have a lot of space here. But the loss is always there, no matter what. No matter what in your life, however long it is, the loss will always be with you. And that's a good thing. I treasure the memories, the happy memories of all of my loved ones that have passed. I still have fond memories of my mother. And the times with my father, I can look back now and just laugh about things. And so, because the losses are always going to be with me. They're not going away. But the grief is. Grief.
Oh,
Yeah.
I just got that. Okay. Yeah, I just got that. That was amazing. Yes. Why is it that birthdays and holidays seems to be so hard for people grieving?
Well, that is, we all get excited when birthdays are coming up, the Christmas holidays, everyone gets in the spirit. Well, the person, the empty chair is now there at the table.
Yeah.
The one, the memories that you shared on Christmas morning as a family or Christmas Eve as a family, that person's not there anymore. So it's all, some call it triggers. I just call those days, those are days that you long for them to be here. But ways to that will help you through that is to have a plan going into the holiday. So if you're at the very beginning of your grief journey, have your support people, talk to them prior, have a plan. Say if it's the first Christmas or the first Thanksgiving, let your immediate family know, I don't know how it's going to work for me this year. It's the first year, so I may not be myself. It's okay. It's okay not to be okay. And for the upcoming holidays, you turn your mourning into joy. There's a song by Willie Nelson. It's, he says, it's not something you get over, but it's something you get through. And that is grief.
Yes.
I love that song.
When going through grief, it seems like your energy is low, you can't get out the bed, your appetite is either there or not there. You're in like a brain fog, you can't think, you can't concentrate. Why do you have all of these maybe intangible things that other people maybe can't see, but the person that's grieving can see and can feel?
That is just the heart of grief. That, you are in the center point of all those emotions. Typically that's in the very beginning stages of grief. Like I said, some can prolong though. Some can stay in that part of that process of grief and never leave it. But it is, I mean, at the beginning of the shock phase and going beyond that, you go through every one of those things that you just said. The brain fog where you can't even concentrate.
Yes.
You know, because grief affects your mind, your body, and your soul. And so all of those emotions, like I said, you're typically here during those stages.
Okay.
And so when you begin to move forward, where you can go ahead and start some of your daily life, what you did prior to, and the more you do, the better it's going to get. And of course, I always recommend exercising, just getting out, walking in nature, doing some things you typically didn't do prior, because that's part of your healing.
Okay. What, this next question is for like the friends and the family of the person that's grieving.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times they don't know what to say,
Mm-hmm.
so they end up not saying anything.
Right.
Or they feel like, I don't want to make you sad, so
Mhm.
I'm just not even going to acknowledge it. I'm not going to say anything.
Right.
We're just going to talk about the weather outside.
Mm-hmm.
What is some advice you can give for the friends and the family of a person that's grieved, as
Right.
far as how to console them, how to even bring it up?
Mm-hmm. Mainly it's just being there for them and letting them be the driver. If they want to talk about it, then you have a listening ear. Where a lot of people, including myself, prior to losing my son, I had friends that have lost a child, and I would always say, I can't imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's being told to me. So, you know, it's just being there for them and doing spontaneous things with them. And then most of the time, they want you to share those memories and their stories of their loved one, because that is what truly gets buried, is that no one wants to mention the name around them because it's going to be too sad. But I promise you, all of us that have lost a loved one will never not want to hear a story about that loved one, because that keeps those memories alive.
Mm-hmm.
That puts positive adrenaline in you versus the negative. So I would say just being there for them, let them speak, share those memories of their loved one, say their names. They love hearing their names.
Yeah.
Don't give them too many. A lot of people like to tell them how to go through their grief. It's not your grief, it's their grief.
Mm-hmm.
You can, if they ask, you know, how did you handle this? Then yes, absolutely, share with them. But you know, let them ask that question.
Do you think an expected death, like a relative that's older, okay, the doctor says they have, you know, a couple days, a month,
Mm-hmm.
is easier than an unexpected death? Just one day they're here, the next day they're gone.
Yeah. I believe they're all the same.
Okay.
Loss is loss and grief is grief. The only thing about the unexpected losses is the trauma part of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's on top of the loss and the grief, you're dealing with trauma as well. So that's a whole different category.
Okay.
It's connected to grief because it's traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened. But no, loss is loss, and it's the same process for us all. Yeah, you can prepare when the doctors have said, you know, hospice, or if you're in hospice. I was at the bedside for my mother, and they were telling us days, and a day turned into a week.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, at the bedside for a week, that's kind of hard.
Yeah.
But it was no different when she passed and took that last breath. It was still, I mean, grief just engulfs you at that time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you just, you know, something about that last breath.
Yeah, it is something about that last
Mm-hmm.
breath.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a certain way, and probably not, but for my listeners and my viewers, are there tangible things that you can tell us about how to get through grief? Is there working out or eating something or reading something? Because grief is really kind of an intangible.
Right.
You can't really see it, touch it.
Yes.
So are there things that you can say, do this, and it will help you get through your grief?
Yes. Well, number one thing is one day at a time.
Okay.
Don't look too far ahead. A lot of times we want to, like I said, we want to have an end date on how long this grief is going to be. That's how I was. I'm a planner. I spoke with my therapist and said, okay, how long? That's the first thing I said. I am a planner. But it's a process. No one can give you that. I would say don't have those expectations on yourself or others. My health declined tremendously because I did need medications to even sleep at night. So my health had declined through my grief process. So I began to, this is when, I have to make a choice here. Am I going to stay down this road of grief and let it really consume the rest of my life?
Right.
So I had to make a choice, and I made the correct choice, even though I was doing the right things, but I was still stuck. So I said, I'm going to work on my health. So I began to walk every day.
Okay.
On my street or at my office. I did a supplement line to really, because like I said, my strength and everything, I was just so no energy at all.
Yes.
I've been taking medication to sleep and just woke up every day, felt like I had a hangover.
Yes.
It's from the medication. And so I said, I can't stay on this medication the rest of my life. I don't want to rely on a little pill. So I began to really focus on my health. So that's always good, is just to switch that focus to something. It could be reading books, it could be riding a bicycle. Do something that you haven't done before, that you've always longed to do. I love music, and I love the violin, so I started taking violin lessons.
Wow.
And that was part of my grief, my healing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Just find something that's really going to bring you into a positive light, that's going to, something you're passionate about, maybe something you haven't done, but definitely focus on your health, because your health takes a tremendous toll during grief.
One of the things that I've understood during our conversation is loss and grief, though they go hand in hand, eventually can become separate. Do you think that people who have experienced a loss that eventually turns into grief, do you think that they need to seek out therapists or counseling?
Like I said earlier, it depends on your process. If you're stuck and you cannot seem to get past something, a lot of times it's just getting out of your home, where you're isolating from others. You're not really wanting to be a part of anything. If you were going to church, you're not really going to church anymore. You go to work, but you're not really functioning well. You're very irritable, anxiety-driven, depression, any of those things. Absolutely, you should definitely seek help.
I know one of the things that has happened since the loss of your son is something, Sabbatical of Hope. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, so back when I kind of made that choice, okay, I've got to really lean into the Lord during this time, and started, exercising again, and I on our street, I have this. Our neighbors have these beautiful crepe myrtle trees, and I watched them during that season because a crepe myrtle, you cut it off, it's bare, it's just sticks.
Right.
And so it looks dead.
It does.
But then as the season begins to come, you see it starts blooming a little bit of leaves. Before you know it, it's a full bloom tree.
It's beautiful.
That's beautiful with these little white flowers. And God had just gave me the analogy of a grief journey just by walking, because I said, you know what, I'm gonna make a choice and I'm not gonna stay here. I'm gonna start doing things to better my health. And as I started doing that, my mind started getting more clear so I could hear from Him. And so the Sabbatical of Hope, 3 months after I lost my son, a very dear friend let me stay in her beach cabin for 10 days because I had to process that loss. And during that time, that was at the very beginning stages. So I just sat out there for hours. It was so therapeutic. And as I began to heal, just with everything that God's done in my life, I went on a mission trip, and I was giving them a message on the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And I clearly heard from the Lord. He said, you're going to call up mothers at the end of this and give them a heart. And I said, no, I'm not. That's not how I normally give a message, and I just get off the stage or whatever it is. Oh, yeah, you are. So, of course, he won.
Of course.
I called for the mothers to come up because that's, the enemy plays with you. Nobody's going to come up. Why do that? The altar was filled with mothers that had lost children.
Did you know it was that many?
No, I had no idea. When we was getting to that point, butterflies were in my stomach. I go, I gotta obey. I called up, the altar was filled. During that mission trip is where the Sabbatical of Hope was truly birthed. And I said, I'm gonna take them back to the beach where he started my healing. And so we've got one coming up. We have it every October.
Okay.
And we have a beautiful beachfront cabin. We typically have 18 to 20 mothers. We keep it smaller because it's very intimate. We're going into our 4th year of doing the Sabbatical of Hope, and every year's been a little bit different. And it's just a beautiful weekend.
If there are mothers who are watching this or listening to this that want to participate in your Sabbatical of Hope, how do they do that?
So they can, we have a Sabbatical of Hope Facebook page.
Okay.
We have a website. They go to sabbatical.chaserightchoices.org. Chase Right Choices is a nonprofit that supports Sabbatical of Hope. And they can register.
And I'll make sure and have all of that information in the description box below, so if you want to attend the Sabbatical of Hope, you can do that. You have also written a book, or are you in the process of writing a book about grief?
Okay, so I have written a book back in 2011. It's called Believe It's Possible. It's a memoir of my best friend that passed away of cancer. She was very instrumental in my life and prayed for me. Back then I was in darkness, and God did a miracle and said, you're going to write a book. And so I did. I said, I'll never write one again, because that's a process too. But yes, so I am in the process now. I think it's going to be more or less like a curriculum, a model for Sabbatical of Hope, just bringing them through the stages of grief, and seeing how all that works out for them to give them hope.
Absolutely. Now, it seems to me, and if I'm wrong, correct me, but it seems to me that your Sabbatical of Hope, your retreat for mothers who've lost children, the book that you've written, the curriculum that you're in the process of doing, of course, all of that came after the loss of your son. Do you think you would have done any of that had your son not passed away?
I would say no.
Why do you think?
It just was not in my everyday life.
Mm-hmm.
So I was busy with all kinds of other projects,
Yeah.
and grief wasn't in my circle at the time.
That's amazing to me how grief can birth the unexpected in a great way.
Yes.
You know, of course it births the unexpected and sadness and things like that, but you know, it seems to have birthed such great things in you after such a traumatic loss. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, today I'm so very grateful that I am one of the success stories in grief, and especially for God's success story, that I made it, and I want to be able to share that with others to give them hope, because I can definitely see where people do get stuck in grief, and that they feel like that they'll never be their self again, that they fear that they'll never be able to recover from the loss of this person. Whereas you're still here, and there's so much life left in you. So again, you have a choice whether or not you're going to live the life that God put you here, created you for, or are you going to mourn the loss of that loved one for the rest of your life?
It is a choice. As we are getting ready to wrap up this interview and this podcast, if people want to reach out to you, they're seeking counseling, they're going through grief. First question, are you accepting new clients? And second, how can someone reach you if they need your services?
Yeah. So I do the life coaching through Any Christian Counseling. So just reach out to them, and they'll pass your, I'll contact them at that point.
Okay.
So.
Is there anything else as we get ready to say goodbye that you would like to say about grief?
Yeah, I want to show them this picture because it's so very relevant to, so this was created last year right before Seabactical of Hope, and the name of the curriculum, like we said at the beginning, is called Broken Hearted to Blooming. And this is a picture at the end where you go through the process of grief, that there's still life. This is a tree of life that lives on the inside of each one of us. That we still have life. We can see all the butterflies going around, the flowers you can see again, whereas before you might not have seen them prior. I love this little teardrop bottle at the top, because those are all the tears that are collected through your grief journey. And honestly, those tears are what is the nourishment for your tree. Because without the tears, you're not going to grow. Wow. Tears are healthy.
Tears are healthy.
Yes.
That's a great way to end.
Yeah.
That's a great way
and it's
to
okay.
end, Cathy.
It's okay to, however many years you're going through, it's still okay to cry. I still have my days that I should, fill up that bottle, and that's okay because it's healthy.
Right. And it goes back to what you said earlier with your beautiful analogy that the grief will leave, but the loss stays there.
The loss is always there. There's nothing we can do about that. And we don't want to. That loss, they're part of our life still, even though they're in heaven and we're here. We're just one breath away.
One breath away. And I really feel like the person that we have lost, I don't know if they would want you to go on with your life as if they were never there, as if they were never a part of your life, as if you never loved and they never loved you.
Right.
So the fact that the loss stays there is really, a remembrance of the person, I feel like.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Cathy, so much for giving me so many aha moments, about grief and that it's a recovery. You have to recover from grief, and it's something I never thought about. And the analogy that you showed really gives it a visual of how you feeling and how you progress through grief, because as you said, the definition of grief is getting through that loss. So that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
My final question for you is, who do you think would make a great guest on the podcast? But you have to help me get them on.
Okay. Well, one that comes to mind, because they're doing so many incredible things, is Dr. Wendy Elmore. She's over at Lamar State College, Orange. And they actually just opened, they're getting ready to open up a satellite location here in Lumberton for the people up in this area, Silsbee, so they don't have to drive all the way to Orange. But she is the provost there, and she, I believe she, does all the programs and things. So I think our youth growing up today we need them to have all of the access that they need to their education and the schooling, and to make it fun for them.
Absolutely.
The college years are some great years, and so they're doing some great things over at that university, and so I think she'd be a great person for you.
Thank you. And again, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you all for tuning in and watching. This podcast and the rest of my podcasts can all be found on YouTube Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. And remember, there's always time to listen and learn on the go.
Sit back, buckle up, enjoy the ride with Crystal.